Every high-performing individual in the United States of America has some kind of coach, and a lot of them are personalized. And it's not just they use the coach to get to a certain level. Now they're using the coach to stay at that level, to get to the next level, or whatever the case might be. So there is no shame in admitting, I could be. Matter of fact, it's admirable that I want to be better than who I am. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Manhood Podcast. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and I'm excited. I'm joined by, once again, Kim Gwaltney, wife of over 3 decades. Today, we're going to be talking about family origin, and I'm excited about this because I think it's kind of the linchpin to some of the challenges that we face in our own immediate families, and I think it also has a super big influence and impact on future generations. So, Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How important, let's just hit the ground running, how important do you think it is to realize where and what your spouse came from as you're now joining them, in marriage?
I think it's very important. I think it's much easier when we're dating to hide things because we're on our best behavior. But then, when you get married, it's a lot harder to hide those things because, they're going to come out somewhere. And so I think it's so much easier to discuss some of the things, before you're married. I wish I would have. We got married very young. And so I think it would have been, very helpful, very beneficial if I would have kind of understood this a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I think it's a lot harder to hide those things when you get married.
Yeah. Me as well. I had no clue about any of this. When you reflect on the culture of your upbringing, we talk a lot about culture, but you just think about it. The family you were raised in was the culture that was normal to you. And it's what everything was, it's what your upbringing was like. It's so important because now it's influential in all these things that we believe, whether that's how you see yourself, how we respond in relationships, all the way down to how we respond in emotions and choices and all the decisions that we make. So today, guys, we're really hoping that we can almost bring some of this to light, give you, I encourage you, if you don't have it now, grab a pen, a piece of paper. If you're listening to this going down the road, listen to it twice, go back, because we're going to give you some stuff to help you kind of reflect so you can get the most out of this topic today. And then at the end, maybe even an action plan of some things you can do, because we both feel like this is so important and could cause you to avoid so many struggles, so many fights, and achieve some of the things that you're really wanting to achieve next generational as well as in your immediate family. And that we're going to give you a lot of content today in a short amount of time. So, which
I'll add something to that first comment too. I think it gives you, when you kind of understand where your spouse has come from and you understand their upbringing, that you can have empathy when you do have, when you know that person's struggling with something. It kind of gives you more empathy for them to help them with that, to improve it or change it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because sometimes what's easy to us when it's a struggle for somebody else, it's like, what's the big deal? Why don't you just suck it up and do it? You don't do it because you don't want to do it, whatever. And it's real easy, I think, to approach it that way, but you're exactly right. Sometimes there's a demand on us. I'll take the husband side here for a minute. Sometimes there's a demand on us as husbands to give something that we've never gotten ourselves, or maybe we never even seen modeled. And it's not an excuse, but it does give you understanding to your point of where that starting point is. And so, and maybe then in that case, a spouse can recommend a mentor, a relationship, a book, a podcast.
Which I even think on that, I'll bring this up. And this is a topic too, I think, that we're pretty private people, but yet this is a topic where you can really dive into a lot of personal issues. So I don't know where to go, but just with that point that you just made about, you didn't have a good relationship with your mom, your birth mom, so no relationship at all, basically. So when we got married, I think it's very hard for a person like that because I was very nurtured. And so I was, I think, fairly loving and showed compassion and a lot of different things. But it was very hard for you to accept that, I think, because you never had that nurturing before. So you didn't really know how to handle that.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely believe that's the case. And I think even in leading people, it's been difficult for me. Like what I feel for somebody is not always communicated in a way that they understand how much maybe I appreciate them or how much I value them, because I think it goes back kind of that nurturing thing that you're talking about. And it doesn't come natural. So, and yeah, that's probably going to be one of just many examples, guys, as you're listening to this. I want you to put yourself and just be real honest. Probably one of the hardest things we'll ask you to do is go back through that self-awareness of your own upbringing. Because I think sometimes it can even be more difficult to be honest, about our own weakness, our own shortcomings, maybe the own shortcomings of our family as we were growing up. And maybe part of the reason is because we thought that was normal till we seen something different. And so, if you're willing to do the work in what we're talking about today and invest in it, you'll see the results. So let's just kind of get rolling. So let's talk about just the term family origin and unpack that just a little bit. Tell those that are listening today, when we're referring to family origin, what, in your words, what does that really mean?
Well, I think our family of origin is a family we were born into or adopted into. It's the people who raise us and who we spend most of our childhood with.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'm sure we have people listening. Maybe you were raised by a grandparent. Maybe you had to move in with a sibling. Maybe you bounced from foster home to foster home and then you were adopted. I mean, it's not just your parents, but it's in those formative years up to 18 years old, that culture influenced who you are today, your view of life, your worldview, but not just your worldview. It shaped some of your parenting skills, good, bad, and indifferent. It shaped how you interact with your spouse.
Even our core beliefs.
Oh, yeah, all the way down to that. So, guys, this is why this is so important. It really subconsciously affects almost every decision that you make, because it's that point you're drawing from. Why do you think we're challenging them to go back and think about their own upbringing? Why is that so important? What is there to learn there? Why is that exercise valuable? Maybe why was it valuable for you?
Well, I think digging back into our family, of origin, how it shapes our marriage, it's kind of like, opening up a Pandora's box in a good way. It's about understanding the roots, that nurture the tree, your childhood experiences, the emotional climate you grew up in, and your family quirks. So they all play a part in our story of how we handle everything in our life.
That's true. And as humans, we're creatures of habit. And so as much as growing up, maybe one of your parents irritated you by a certain behavior, how many of us have caught ourselves doing the exact same thing? It's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Or when you're younger, you say, oh my gosh, when I get married, when I leave this house, I'm never going to do that. And then we find ourselves doing that exact same thing, scratching our head like, where did that come from? Well, that's what we've seen, all those years. Yeah.
It's our routines are almost like a learned pattern from those we've spent the most time with.
And it's not just bad things. It's good things as well. It's both. I think it's a lot of good things, a lot of bad things.
Yeah. And that right there should give you the courage to go back and just spend some time just reflecting. And guys, I know this is a novel idea, but turn not just the television off, but turn your phone off. Leave it in the other room. Just get to a place where you just kind of go back and envision yourself as a toddler all the way through when you left your home. Maybe that was at 18. Maybe it was before that. Maybe it was later than that. And just kind of revisit all those moments. Start by maybe going through the highlights. What were birthdays like? What were celebrations like in your home? I mean, we'll get more detail to help you kind of think through that. But that's what we're talking about, because that's where you're going to uncover some of the gold. They're almost like clues. If you're on a treasure hunt.
And it's like the differences too, because we both were raised differently, not in all things, but a lot of things. And then just when you get married, bringing those things together, what you think's normal, I think's abnormal, or vice versa. And then just kind of coming up with your own, what works for your family.
Yeah. And normal, abnormal, obviously that's one of the things. Other, I think could just be expectations. You know, how whatever you seen in my case, my dad's role was in the home that I observed, maybe not something he said, this is how you should be a husband when you grow up. No, it was really, you just watched. And so like, who did the dishes in the home most of the time? Who did most of the cooking? Who took care of the yard? Who took care of the routine maintenance? You know, it was, you know, who's that responsibility? Some of those things are just unspoken. And so you see it, and then that just becomes the expectation.
But then you grow, you know, when you get married, then you have those expectations of, well, you know, my wife's going to cook for me. She's going to do my laundry. She's going to do all these things. She's going to be the one to clean the house because that's what you had modeled. The other person's thinking, the other spouse is thinking, you know, that you're going to do some of those things and help out. So that's where, you know, it's very important to have these discussions beforehand. And I think, like I said earlier, it could have saved us a lot of heartache.
Yeah. This to me is the real practical stuff that comes up in premarital counseling. Should be.
Yes.
Yeah, there's the basic things that you want to, you know, a couple needs to think about when they're getting married. But man, this is the kind of stuff that people end up getting divorced over. They're the little things that just become this big irritant. And I know most people listening today, you probably didn't have premarital counseling. And if you did, I can guarantee it wasn't enough, because it didn't matter if it was 6 weeks or it was 6 minutes. It wasn't enough, I promise you. You know, you made a commitment to serve someone for the rest of your life, and depending on when you got married, that may be for the next 60 or 70 years. So there was not enough preparation in that to prepare you for everything that you're going to face by being a husband or being a wife or being a parent. So this is an ongoing kind of lifetime learner. Which,
I mean, I know in the past we've done premarital counseling with other people, and you know, that's one thing we're big on is finding out what was your family like, you know, what kind of environment did you grow up in, that we kind of ask to get the ball rolling, that maybe they hadn't thought about that, and to hear each other's story. You know, I don't know, maybe they grew up, you know, even like how they handled conflict, like, you know, did your mom throw skillets at your dad, you know, all that, which we'll get into some things later. But I mean, those are things you got to talk about that.
Yeah, because you could leave somebody in a state of shock thinking, you know, I married the wrong person, this is over. And the other person's thinking, that's just, that's how my grandparents did it, that's how my parents did it. And at the end of all that, they just all kissed, made up, and we replaced and repaired stuff. Wasn't a big deal. And so, you know, being on the same page, you know, saves a lot of heartache. So we want to challenge everybody today to do this exercise with us. And this is the one we were referring to a while ago on reflection. Because really, everything goes back to this question: how would you describe your mother and your father? And I want you to insert that. You don't get a pass if, well, they were both absent. I'd describe them as deadbeats. All right, was their grandma there? Was grandpa there? Was it your brother? Whoever that is, you insert them in there. But it's still the same question, because it's the principle of this. And in that reflection, we'll give you a cheat code here. These are some of the questions you ought to be asking yourself. If you want to jump in and just throw them a couple to think about, I'll do the same. And this is not, guys, not an exhaustive list. There could be more, but this is to get your mind going in that direction to kind of help you with this exercise a little bit.
So like one of them is, how were they, your parents in the home towards you? You know, how did they act? Did they make you, I mean, I know like in my home, and it's good, I think, to give examples of this and, and even dive into some maybe personal issues at some point. But like, you know, especially my dad, I always felt safe. He always protected me. I felt very secure. It's even little things like that, you know, that sometimes we take for granted in our childhood.
Well, you know, one of the things about my dad that I remember that probably abnormal for some guys is that he never held back the term, you know, I love you, you know, and a lot of guys just, they don't say that. So people go their whole life and they never hear that. And, you know, I give him props for that, because that was one of the things that he did. And I don't know if he had that from his dad or not. I almost think he probably did a whole lot better job at that in his generation than the previous generation. But it's one of the things that I remember, you know. So for me, that was a very natural thing for our kids, 2 sons and a daughter, to remind them, hey, we love you and I believe in you and we care for you. So,
but even with that, I remember once I was kind of reading over this morning, and I don't even know why this popped into my mind, but talking about that, like even with my dad, he always made me feel very secure, very safe. So I remember, of course, like I said, we got married very young. And so we were traveling somewhere and something happened. I can't remember all the details about it, but I was just like thinking in my mind, oh my gosh, what would my dad do? I wish my dad was here because I was so used to that, which I'm not saying you didn't, that's not what I'm saying, but you just find yourself, because he did make me feel so safe, secure in all areas, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, again, the stuff we're talking about is your point of reference. It's almost your center and your compass that you're going back to.
Which you're like that. But, if you weren't like that, then I would probably question a lot of things, or earlier on, if you hadn't been like that, which you are. So.
Yeah, I remember we went on a vacation one time and our daughter was much, much younger, and we were actually in a foreign country. And it was something really, really simple. And she was dating a guy that, was a good guy. But he was not the man that I wanted my daughter to marry. That was on the bubble at the time. But one of the things that reminded me of that is like when it come time like to go to a restroom. Do you remember this?
Oh, I remember it.
I wouldn't just send her to the restroom in that type of environment. I would have went just like I would have done with you.
Right.
And that thought never even crossed his mind. And he also come from a very broken home. Mm-hmm. Probably never seen that modeled, probably never crossed his mind. That was his point of reference. And
so it wasn't that he didn't care about her. It was that he had never, like you said, he had never seen it modeled. He'd probably never seen that in his life, because, you would go to the bathroom or not go to the bathroom, but wait at the door, those kind of things, which I'm sure, like you said, was so foreign to him.
Yeah. So just an example of some of the stuff that we're talking about. And it doesn't again, guys, it doesn't give you a pass. It becomes the starting point. Where do I need to start from? Where do I need to look for that model now? And there's so many resources that there really is an excuse not to grow. It's just pure laziness if you're not willing to do it. And it's not saying it's easy, but there's accessibility to models and tools and resources to help all of us to be better at that. I think one of them, one of the questions were they workaholics? Man, the answer to that question can tell a lot of stories. There's something admirable about somebody that is committed to taking care of their family and hoping, that, their goal is that their kids will have a better life than maybe what they had. And really kind of going back and asking some questions about the previous generation might give you some indications on why they're workaholic. What was their motive? Sometimes we look at it, we see the destructive part of that. It's like, well, they're never here. They're never at the important things. They never were da-da-da-da-da. What was driving them to pick work over those things that were important? And in a lot of ways, it was probably something internal maybe that they didn't get. But asking those questions are so important. What's another one?
Were they addicts?
Yeah. Yeah. So, some people are addicts because it becomes a coping mechanism for struggles, difficulties, trauma, that's in their life. And so they may act like one person part of the time and another person when they were under the influence of whatever their addiction was. He was a great dad when he was sober, but nobody wanted to be around him, and it was dangerous when he wasn't. Wow. That's the tale of two faces there. So that definitely has an impact, on everybody else that's in that home, when they're growing up.
And I think on that too, you can either fall into that trap because that's what you see modeled, or, when you're a child, you can say, oh, I remember what that was like. When I grow up and have my family, I don't ever want to put my spouse or my kids through what I went through. And so it causes you to be a better person and to change.
Yeah. Yeah. It can become a real inspiration. Again, it's important too, because you think about that. Two people get married. One, maybe come from a very broken home full of alcoholics, and the other spouse came from a family that didn't have that addiction, but really enjoyed alcohol. And you bring those two together. Can you imagine sometimes the amount of tension that's going to bring? Because this one was so scarred by how he grew up. It's like, no, there won't be any alcohol in our homes. That's a no-fly for us. Where the other's like, what are you talking about? Because they're coming from two totally different worlds. So these are things you have to talk about, guys.
And more times than not, like I said, this don't even come out till after the fact. After you're married, you're having all the issues and you're wondering why, and then you start. That's where I think it would be great, even after you're married, to have a good, therapist, somebody that speaks the truth in your life, just for these reasons.
Yeah, guys, what we're talking about is not a one-time event. And Kim brought up something really good. She used the word therapist, which maybe terrified a bunch of the guys that are listening today. So let's maybe interchange that with coach.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is every high-performing individual in the United States of America has some kind of coach. And a lot of them are personalized. And it's not just they use the coach to get to a certain level. Now they're using the coach to stay at that level, to get to the next level, or whatever the case might be. So there is no shame in admitting, I could be. Matter of fact, it's admirable that I want to be better than who I am. It's not so much you're admitting that I have all these weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. It's admitting, I think I have more potential in this area than what I'm currently showing, and I just need somebody else to help pull that out of me. So it's a great example. What's another one?
Did they show affection? Was your mother nurturing? And, in my case, yes, I had affection from my mom, from my dad. They were both very nurturing, not just my mom, but my dad as well.
Yeah. And in my case, if you look back at mine, I had an absentee birth mother. And so, that wasn't there. I think, we don't understand the dynamics of all of that when we're being shaped. But if you dig into that a little bit as adults, you realize, well, there's some things that just kind of got put on pause. They never fully developed. You just kind of went on. And I know in my own life, I've kind of made it a lifelong passion of mine to kind of be a student of myself, which can be very scary and depressing at times. But I do think the highest form of wisdom in many cases is knowing yourself. Most people won't be honest with you about you. And many times we'll look in the mirror and we won't even be honest with ourselves. But, if we can be, then that really becomes the beginning point of a whole lot of change. And
I want to interject something there. Just kind of popped into my mind about, your parents being nurturing, or, my parents were, obviously, like you said, your birth mother wasn't. But how important it is if you get a divorce and there's kids involved, how important it is when you get married that you're not only taking that other person, you're getting the whole family. If they have kids, and it is so important to nurture those kids, not that you're ever going to take the place of their parent. Yeah. If that parent is still involved in their life, maybe that parent's missing, but even if that other parent is a great mother or father, it's still, you can help shape that child as well. You can make or break that child, because you're in the home. And I think that is very important, because my mother was divorced. So my stepdad, which is my dad, I had the luxury of having him in my life, thank God. And he was very nurturing. And, I thank God for putting him into my life and help shape my life. But that made such, he didn't have to do that. Yeah. To take care of me and do everything that he did. But I don't know, it just speaks volumes to me. So if you're in that situation and you're marrying into, going into a marriage and there's kids involved, you play a role in that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. A blended family conversation sometime would probably be super helpful to a lot of the people that are listening, because that's half of our audience, if not more. But Kim's exactly right. It's not that you have to be the replacement parent, dad or mom, whoever the case is in that divorce, but you have a responsibility for the culture that is in your home, which is exactly what we're talking about. It's still going to have influence. It's still going to model. It's still going to shape, those people that are living in there. And if you can't make a decision, you need to understand that if you're going to marry someone that has kids, that responsibility doesn't end with a spouse just because the kids happen to have another parent. And if you can't embrace that, then you probably have no business entering into that covenant relationship, because it's just going to be turmoil from there going forward. Don't get me wrong, none of that's easy. We both grew up in blended homes. We're talking from experience. It can be messy. There's not an easy roadmap for any of that kind of stuff. But you need to go in eyes wide open. Yes, here's a question you want to ask as you're doing the reflection. Emotionally, how would you describe your parents or whoever was in that role of hitting culture in the home that you grew up in? Like, emotionally, how were they? In other words, did your dad ever show affection? Did your mom ever show affection? Was your family one that hugged a lot, said I love you, patted you on the back? Or were they more like, if nothing was said, it was the unspoken word that you did a good job? You know what I'm saying?
Yes. So
those are the questions you need to go back and ask. And again, there's 100 more, but if you really want to dig in and unearth some of those points of your past, try to get a better grip and understanding of where you and your spouse came from. Because I think you got to ask these questions internally to yourself. These are definitely the same ones you need to be exploring with your spouse. This would be a great date night exercise. Go out and take 5 or 6 questions, and I want to figure out where you came from. What made you who you are today, good, bad, or indifferent? Any other questions that would help them on this quest?
There's one were they super busy?
Yeah.
Were they hypersensitive? That's another one.
Yeah. So, were they more, nobody spoke the truth because everybody got offended? Certain subjects you would just never talk about. Maybe because they harbored grudges. If you come from a family like, you crossed me once, you'll never cross me again. There may be a long line of bitterness in that family. There may be an anger problem. You may have that. That may be the same way you deal with stuff. I can promise you, if it is down the road, it shows up in the form of your physical health. It shows up in ulcers. It shows up in all kinds of things. So it's not going to only help your parenting, your marriage. It could actually physically help your health.
Yes.
I think here's a big one. Who is the spiritual leader in the home? I think if you study Scripture, you know who the spiritual leader should be. The Bible is very clear about that, whose responsibility that falls on and who's going to be held accountable for that. But that's not what we're asking. We're asking, look back at your house. Who is the spiritual leader? Did mom take you to church? And dad always caught up on the repairs at home and had lunch ready when you got home? Did dad take you to church and maybe mom did the opposite? Who was it? What are you smiling at? Do you have?
No, I was very blessed in this area. Both of my parents, my dad was a spiritual leader in the home, but my mom was as well. She was a spiritual leader too. She was constantly, every morning she'd get up, have her devotion, read the Bible. Like I said in another podcast before, I grew up with them praying together, hearing them pray together. So yes, my dad was the spiritual leader, but my mom was also a spiritual leader in my home.
And so, that could bring great insight to maybe, maybe you're listening today and you're like, I wish my husband would just step up and he would go to church with me. Maybe you've never seen that. Mm-hmm. Maybe when he grew up, it was just assumed that the spiritual responsibility and the spiritual mature people in the home were the females. And so that's foreign to him.
And a lot of the times that is the percentage. I don't know what, the percentage would be that most women are the ones who take their kids to church. The dad does whatever, works, plays golf, whatever. I'm just, but it's a lot of the times you'll see that it's the mother who is a spiritual leader in the home.
Yeah. So guys, this is not an endless list, but hopefully this kind of jumpstarts you. Let me give you another one. How would you describe their marriage? In other words, like, did they like being married? Mm-hmm. Did they tolerate it? Were they affectionate? And here's one, and I don't know why this seems so odd 2 generations before, Did they sleep in the same room? Did they have their own bedrooms? I mean, you ought to be asking these questions, because you may see some behavior is like, what is going on? What do you mean you want your own room? What's up? You want your own bed? What's up with that? Like,
it was her room, his room. Like,
yeah.
that was one set of my grandparents were like that. And I always thought,
one set of my grandparents were like that.
What is this about? I don't get all this, because I mean, grew in my home. My parents were very affectionate. They loved being married still to this day. They've been married 50 years or 52 years. And my dad still shows my mom as much affection now than he, as he did when I was growing up. So,
yeah. So guys, these are clues. These are clues to where you're starting from. And they're also clues of understanding who you've chosen maybe to spend the rest of your life with, and what and who has influenced your parenting skills. Here's one thing that I would say is, some of this may be new to you today. Some of this may be like light bulb moments, like, oh, yeah, that's why. That's where that came from. Own it. Don't use it as an excuse. Now, here's some of you who's like, I've got an anger problem because it runs in my family. Well, why is it still running in your family? You just acknowledge it's a problem. Why are you empowering it to continue? So now you own it. And so, but the flip side of that is, start where you're at. And you can't do anything about the last 5 years, but you can do something about the next 5 years based on the decisions that you're making today, how you're investing in yourself, who you're putting out there in front of you, who's modeling for you. So let's talk just quickly about some of the reasons why understanding the family of origin is important. And we've listed out just a handful of these things here. You want to get us started? Or I can take the first one. It doesn't matter. Reasons why understanding all this. You've done the homework. Now you're discovering this stuff. Now, why is understanding that family of origin so important?
Well, I think number one, if you just want to start there, is recognizing the dysfunctional behaviors. And everybody has an area where they struggle in. To overcome negative patterns and behaviors learned from family is, you have to first recognize that they even exist so that you can, improve them or even change them.
Yeah. And so, like, dysfunctional behavior, maybe that's yelling instead of talking in your house. Maybe that's more aggression. Maybe that's slamming doors and throwing things.
Or avoidance. Just, you don't talk about it. You bring it up, but then there's no conversation about it. You just don't talk about it.
Yeah. And so, like, if we want to get personal again, I'm not typically one, unfortunately, we don't argue a lot, and we've never really had any knockdown, drag out fights. And in almost 40 years, it doesn't mean that there's not challenges, difficulties, and that we don't argue or we don't have what I like to call intense moments of fellowship. But it would be so abnormal for me to pick up something and throw it, or to break it, or feel like I got to slam a door to just make a point. But it'd be very common for me. Okay, you want to act that way? When you're ready to talk about that like somebody mature, we'll talk. And if that's 3 days from now, I'm good with that. And so, very dysfunctional, but that would be more my prone instead of the others. And so, it's very dysfunctional.
Or if you don't ever talk about it, then you just say 3 days later, well, what's wrong? Are you in a bad mood?
There you go. And so
then we start the conversation.
And some of these we go back around the same mountain again, So if you apply the same technique, you're kind of just kicking the can down the road a little bit, and eventually you still have to deal with the same thing.
Which I'll say in this area too, I grew up, my parents really never argued. I've never seen my parents. I mean, they had disagreements. Obviously, they were not perfect by any means, but they resolved the conflict quick. But I never, I remember years ago, they used to open up their home and have like life groups in their homes. For years, they did this. And I remember people walking into our house, and even years later, there were so many people that said, when we come through the doors of your house, there is so much peace here. We feel peace when we walk in this house. And I don't ever remember my parents yelling at each other. They never raised their voice at us kids. I mean, there was just a lot of peace. And it was so strange because people even sensed that. when they walk through my parents' home. And that's just the way they were. They resolved conflict. It's not they didn't have it or they didn't have disagreements or arguments. They did, but it's the way they handled it.
Yeah. Again, guys, this is why this is so important. I think the other thing it does too is it helps us to continue a healthy behavior. And so what you were describing was healthy. I mean, you can't bring two people that are different, put them in the same house and live together, and there not be a difficulty, and there not be a challenge, there not be something that is said that is, I don't agree with it. I would have done it a different way. It's just part of it, but there's a healthy way. And so as you're doing this, you can look back and find out, there was some healthy things in my household. Maybe your parents sacrificed stuff looking back now as an adult, that they could have done, that they wanted to do, that was a passion of theirs, but they didn't. And now you realize why they didn't, and so maybe that caused you to give them a little bit of grace for why they worked so much. Maybe they worked so much because they didn't have the job or the skill set to give you the lifestyle that they wanted you to have. So it required them to work two jobs in order to be able to just make make sure that your needs were met. I don't know, but what I'm saying is there's a reflection on that, and there's some good behaviors, healthy ones. Maybe they were very hospitable towards people. Maybe they didn't have a whole lot to give, but they were the first ones to give. They were the first ones to help a neighbor. They were the first ones to help someone in need. They were the first ones to encourage somebody. And what you'll find is maybe those some of the traits that you have. And be honest, we can edit this if we need to, but your biological dad in a lot of ways is a deadbeat when it comes to taking care of his daughter, which is my wife, the most precious thing in my life. But at the same time, if you talk to other people, there's a reputation around his willingness to give, and he helps people. I don't think he ever figured out how to do it as a dad. So he probably compensated, is the only thing I can come up with in my mind, on doing it for everybody else. But my point in saying all of that is that there's this generous side that's always in you where you're wanting to give to somebody. You're wanting to give back.
And I never could figure out where that came from. I mean, my parents are very giving, obviously, but I just had this, deep desire, just to go above and beyond in that. That was just something that was in me. And I could never figure out why am I always wanting to give things away or, buy stuff for people or whatever. I could never figure out where that came from until one day it dawned on me. It's like I really haven't had a relationship with my birth father, but yet this is the way people speak of him. I just wasn't the recipient of that, Right. So even going back to that, even though I don't have a relationship with him, that's great, or even any relationship, you can still have some of those healthy tendencies in your life that comes from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just bad things.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too personal here, but I remember the time where we were having kind of one of those emotional moments, and you were expressing to me all the bad habits or the challenges mentally that I have in my life, I got from him. But the counterpart of that, because that's how you were feeling in that moment, is that you also got all this other good stuff.
Right.
Obviously that makes me love you, and your kids adore you, and people around you respect you. And so, guys, the moral to all that is there's some healthy behaviors in there too, if you do that research, that you want to perpetuate. Chew up the meat, spit out the bones, apply the stuff that's good, and that's what you want to pass on to those that mean the most to you. I think we have 5 of these or so. We're about to number 3.
It makes us understand our communication tendencies better, how we communicate with each other, how we encourage. Were you in a family that was encouraging? Were your conversations faith-filled and, around topics of faith? Or were they otherwise? Were you critical with one another? Was your father quick to build you up? Was your mother nagging? Or was the opposite true?
Wow. This This is so important here. So, go a little bit deeper with that. Like, was your father quick to build you up? Was your mother always nagging at you? Or maybe it was the opposite that was true. Did they always tell you, like when they got mad, you're never going to amount to anything. You're worthless. You're lazy. You're selfish. Those seem like empty words, but when they're coming from someone that has the role and the responsibility in your life to shape you, you think sometimes those are just rolling off your back and that really doesn't matter, but they got deep in your psyche.
But it's like those things, it's so strange sometimes if you can't think about, those are the things that stick with us, even out of all of the good things. It's kind of like having that white board and you have a big black dot or a small black dot in the middle. What's the thing that sticks out to us that we know is we don't see all the white around it. We see the black dot in the middle. And so that's kind of, the same thing. Those things stick with us for, forever sometimes.
Yeah. Guys, again, these are the reasons why this stuff is so important.
And we can do that in our marriages. It's just not just, growing up and what our parents told us or whatever. It's, we even do that in our marriages too.
Yeah, for sure. I think if we wanted to keep counting, like number 4 would be, it also helps us recognize our perspectives on intimacy. And that sounds like a word that a female ought to be talking about, not a male. But, intimacy on all levels. And this will be a fun one sometime. Maybe we'll have the sex talk on here sometime. That'll be a highly rated show. But not just sexually. That's part of it, obviously, when you're talking about intimacy. But, again, if your family wasn't very affectionate, whether that was physically on how they showed that or whether that was emotionally, this means that, if I come from a family that was outwardly affectionate and emotional and they were intentional about it, then I'm probably a whole lot more comfortable about being touched by my spouse, talking about my feelings and the opposite. If I didn't experience that, then it's hard for me to relate to. Definitely hard for me to do because it wasn't modeled. So, you want to give us another one?
Helps us understand how we tend to deal with conflict. So conflicting in healthy ways is a big part of marriage. If you came from a family with default conflict volume set to maximum, it would be good to recognize that at less than ideal. From there, you can learn better methods for working through disagreements.
60% of couples admit their family background influences their marital satisfaction. Now think about that. 6 out of 10 married couples say where they came from, how they were raised, the environment that helped shape them is influencing how happy or how sad they are in their marriage today. So guys, what we're talking about really is a game changer. It's this stuff's deeply rooted in us and it has shaped our relationships, and you owe it to yourself and your spouse to have a better understanding of figuring out what that is. So you have that information to know how you can, process that, how you can use that, how that can become a blueprint for helping guide and build your marriage dynamics. And
right, and it's not about blaming, your mom and dad for your fights over who does the dishes or who cooks or any of that. It's about understanding the invisible strings that guide your emotions, reactions, and even your love language. The love language has a lot. It's very important in your marriage to know what your spouse's love language is. Also, your kids' love language. That's very, very important to know that.
And we were just having that conversation in a meeting yesterday about, I asked how helpful it would be if we brought somebody in and you did personality profiles on your kids. We know the benefit of doing that with your spouses. And I encourage you, if you haven't done it, go look up Florence Littauer, Personality Plus. Great book, great test. They're available for free out there. Take them. You'll get an understanding of who it is you're living with. Like, who is that creature and why are they so different? But then you take it a step further, and if you did the same thing with your kids, it would probably cause you to be able to parent them in a different way, in a way that is a whole lot more effective, a whole lot easier, and maybe much more stress-free. Here's the big one I want to give the audience today is I want us to help them break the cycle, because if you've listened to all this, the question you're probably asking is, what can I do? Okay, I heard everything you said, but now what can I do? How can I break free from maybe some of these negative behaviors that I learned from my family? I can tell you it requires a conscious effort, and it not just effort on your part. It's going to require effort on both partners. It may even require some professional help. That's okay. If you really want to grow, you want to have the best people speaking in your life. So go find that coach. Find them on a recommendation. Focus on the family. They have a great resource around the country for people that are coaches and counselors. But
I think even with that too, I'll say something here that even, we go through all these different problems and we were raised differently. And then, people are so easy these days to resort to just, okay, well, we're just going to end this marriage. In divorce, what are you going to do when you go to the next one? Well, then you have something similar, that's why it's so important to know these things up front, and you can avoid a lot of issues if you just know this up front and how to deal with it and get help if you have to, like you said. It's very beneficial. And, one of the first things on that one is just to acknowledge that there's a problem is number one.
Yeah. I think one of the second things you could do is identify the negative patterns that maybe you've inherited from your family. You did the reflection. Now identify, okay, well, this column here was kind of a negative pattern that I inherited, meaning I've seen myself practice this. Would be another one.
Discuss how these patterns affect your relationship.
So discuss them with who? Well, the people in your home. If you're married, obviously your spouse. Maybe if you're a single parent, maybe, your kids or whatever that dynamic is, but discuss them with the people that are the closest to you, that see you on your best days and experience you on your worst days.
I think we can decide on new ways. That would be number 4 is decide on new ways and how you want to handle those conflicts.
That's good. I know for me, sometimes just hearing somebody say like, well, here's what we do. And it's like, I never thought about that. That's how they go about making a decision. That's how they, and so sometimes just listening to others and learning a new way to be able to handle a conflict. Again, I don't mean to beat the same drum, but maybe you need to get some therapy. Maybe you need to get some counseling. Maybe you need to have that coach. Maybe you need to make room in your budget because it is that important. Kim made a comment a while ago. So you give up and you get divorced. Do you know each time you get remarried that the divorce rate goes even higher? Why? Because somebody that was imperfect before as a human, as we all are, now went into another marriage with baggage, but now they went into it with more baggage because now they have new hurts. Now they have new challenges. Now they have new conflicts to pull from. And so it becomes even a bigger challenge. And so,
which I think it's so important to understand. And then, like I said in the beginning of the show, that you can have more empathy for that person when you truly understand where they came from and what they dealt with. It's kind of an eye-opener when they begin talking and start telling you things that they've dealt with in their past and what their dad was like, what their grandpa was like, what their mom was like, all those different issues. And then it kind of gives you empathy for what they've gone through. Oh, that's not something you did to hurt me. And there's a lot of different things we could cover on that, but it just gives you empathy for that person. And then you actually want to help them improve or help them change.
Yeah.
It's not just about, we've been through things in our life, and I know we both came from broken homes. So, early on in our marriage, we decided, well, divorce is not an option. Now, I get sometimes you just can't do anything else. I get that. I'm not saying that that's
right.
what, everybody has to do. But for us, that wasn't an option. I didn't want my kids to have to go through that. You didn't want your kids, our kids to have to go through that. So that was not even an option. And so we worked through, and I mean, so many
stuff.
Things.
Yeah.
I'm talking like, very hard stuff, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, things that weren't easy. And I'm just not talking about just like a little disagreement, but you can work through them, and you can be a better person and come out better, and your marriage can be stronger by working through those instead of just ditching the person and moving to the next one. And it's just a cycle.
Yeah. And I think for me, when it comes to that, because yes, it wasn't that there wasn't opportunities for us to throw in the towel. Definitely was that there wasn't opportunities for you to throw in the towel, because I'm not the easiest person to live with, and I'm definitely not perfect. But, one of the things when I look back is I realized I had a little bit of a default, I think because of abandonment in my life. And so I had no problem that if I got a relationship to a certain point on a personal, professional, or whatever level, and that thing blew apart, it's fine. You're dead to me. I cross you off the list and I move on and I don't think about it again. And I realized at some point, when I said that about other people that were close to me, there's like, I cannot believe that I just said that because I told somebody that. And this was years later, and I'll never forget where I was standing and what I said is like, I've made it this far without this person and that person and that person, and by God, I can sure make it this far without them, and they're dead to me, and I'm done. I'll move on, and I won't think another day about it. And that was a wake-up call to like, whoa, dude, you realize what's going on the inside of you, that it comes to the point where you said that, where you heard it? Like, that's a problem. But fortunately, I think from that.
But then you became self-aware of that problem.
But I never did take that approach with you. I never did take that approach with us in our marriage.
Right.
But it was a natural default for some things.
Yeah.
And anyway.
Which, I think that just, like I said earlier, it just makes our marriage stronger because we worked through things. We just didn't scrap it, and yeah, it was hard. And I think, like I said earlier, we set that out early on.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up, my parents were divorced. I would have to, especially on the holidays, I would have to leave Christmas Day, go to my dad's. And I just did not want my kids to have to be shuffled around, because I know what that's like. It's not fun.
Yeah. If you're listening, that may be your story. We lived with that. And God will give you a grace to navigate that and make the best out of some worse situations. Sometimes you even find out, like as Kim's been referring to, all day long. She got the bonus. She got the dad that she deserved. It just took 2 times to be able to get it. And so, just understand God will give you the grace for wherever you're at to be able to navigate all that. And if you don't have a, what's poor me and woe me attitude about it, you may find out there's additional things that you're learning and you're being exposed to that's going to help you later on in life if you had not went the route, that you went. So, and
I think even with that too, that I did get the dad, and I think a lot of times people think, well, that worked out for you, but that still doesn't. There were still things I had to work through, even though I love my dad. He's great to me. He filled that void that I had of a dad and went above and beyond for me. But still, there was questions in my mind that I had to jump up, get over about, my self-worth and my self-esteem. Why didn't he love me? Why didn't he take care of me? Is there something wrong with me? All those questions that people ask, even though I had a dad that filled that. So it wasn't that I didn't have all those questions. You just have to work through those.
Yeah. Guys, at the end of the day, there's not going to be one human on the face of the earth that's going to be able to meet your needs. Not going to be able to meet all your needs. That's only going to be met through your personal relationship with Jesus. And sometimes I think we put too great of expectations on people that are flawed and human and have just too many great of expectations. Sometimes they just can't do that. That's where you need to lean on your relationship and your faith and continue to grow in that. I would say create a supportive environment that encourages open communication. That's another thing that you can do if we're talking about how you're going to break these cycles. Anything else to add before we move on?
Practice new skills for handling conflict.
Yeah.
Try new things, see if it works.
Maybe find a mentor. A mentor doesn't have to be a professional. It could simply be somebody that you admire, that they have it together in an area that you really want to grow in. They're a great parent. They're just a great wife. They're just a great husband. They're a great host. They're a godly woman. They're a godly man. Whatever the case might be, just position yourself to be around some of those people. Some of the biggest struggles that you have is you have these goals of being a better version of you, but you put people in your life that are subpar, mediocre, or not even as far along as you, and then you wonder why you have this struggle because they're always trying to pull you back, and it seems like you're always fighting against the current to be the best version of you. And maybe you just need to pull some other people in your life, that you can look up to, instead of feeling like I have all these people around me that are just looking to me to give them a hand up. You need some of those people in your life, but they can't be all of them, or you'll never grow. If you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room all the time. You need to position yourself where you're in areas where you're not the smartest person if you actually want to grow. Parting words today, we covered a lot of content.
I mean, I think it's about finding what works specifically for you two and not just copying what was done before, avoiding it, but what works for you, both of you and your family. So.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to land the plane right there. And hopefully, guys, you got a lot out of this. We give you a lot of content. We give you a lot of information. But at the end of the day, it's not what we know. It's what we do with what we know. I encourage you to use some of those questions we give you to go do that self-evaluation, evaluate that culture that you grew up in, and then take that information and some of the other stuff that we talked about and hopefully realize how important it is. And then the last things that we talked about, this is how you change that. This is how you break that cycle. So thanks for joining us today. Always a pleasure when you're sharing the circle with me here. Guys, remember, legacy is not necessarily what you leave to people, but it's more about what you leave in people. We'll see you next time on the Man Up Podcast. Hey, Terry Gwaltney here from the Man Up Podcast. Listen, I just want to tell you how much we appreciate you supporting the podcast, listening to it. We hope it's adding a ton of value to your life. Also want to ask you to do us a favor. If you could like and share this podcast on wherever you consume your social media content, whether that be YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, we would appreciate it. It just helps us get the word out so we can help more people. And maybe you've never experienced the Man Up Adventure Camp that we do in October. You can check out our Facebook or our website, manup-camp.com. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to the Man Up Podcast, and we'll see you soon.